She was nobody, just an amateur seamstress with big dreams and a needle in her hand. But when she finally got the chance to show her designs to the fashion world, it wasn't a warm welcome. It was a cold, cutting insult from the one person she'd hoped would believe in her, Julia Lancaster, the most famous fashion designer in the industry. "You're wasting your time," Julia sneered, laughing at her work. But what if that insult wasn't the end? What if it was the spark that would set her on fire, igniting a journey no one, not even Julia, could predict? Could one woman's passion defy the harshest judgment and turn the world's spotlight on her instead? The small, brightly lit studio was filled with the sound of sewing machines whirring and the soft clink of scissors cutting through fabric. Shelves stacked high with rolls of vibrant textiles lined the walls, while mannequins draped in half-finished dresses stood like silent witnesses. In the center of it all, a young woman named Ellie worked tirelessly at her station, her eyes focused intently on the fabric she was stitching together. She had always dreamed of becoming a famous fashion designer, but for now, her world consisted of late nights spent sewing pieces of clothing for her tiny online shop. Ellie was no stranger to hard work. Ever since she was a child, she had found comfort in fabric, its soft textures and endless possibilities. Her mother, a skilled seamstress, had taught her how to sew when she was just a little girl. Together, they would make clothes for their family, and Ellie had always known that one day she would make her mark in the fashion world. But life hadn't always been kind to her. Money was tight, and Ellie had to take up a full-time job to support herself while building her brand. Still, her dream of one day becoming a recognized designer never wavered. Her online shop, which she ran from her SML apartment, was growing slowly but steadily. She knew she wasn't yet the next big thing in fashion, but she was determined to get there. Every evening, after finishing her shift at the local coffee shop, she would rush home, eager to design and create. Each piece was a labor of love, each stitch an expression of her passion. But one chilly Thursday morning, something happened that would change Ellie's life forever. It was an ordinary day at the shop. Ellie was adjusting the hem of a delicate dress when the bell above the door chimed. A tall woman, dressed in a perfectly tailored jacket and dark sunglasses, stepped into the studio. Her presence was magnetic, and her every movement screamed confidence. She looked like someone who belonged on a runway rather than in a small seamstress shop. Ellie barely noticed her at first, too focused on her work, but when the woman's sharp voice broke the silence, Ellie looked up. "You're the one who makes these?" the woman asked, her tone a mix of disbelief and amusement. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't used to people entering her studio without an appointment, especially someone who seemed so out of place in her humble little space. She straightened up and tried to appear calm, though she felt a slight pang of nervousness. Yes, I'm Ellie. I design and create all the pieces myself," she said, her voice steady but unsure. The woman surveyed the room, her eyes gliding over the fabric swatches and sketches pinned to the walls. She sneered slightly. "Huh, I must say I'm surprised. I didn't expect someone who runs such an amateur operation to be taken seriously in the fashion world." Ellie's face flushed with embarrassment. Her heart began to race, and for a moment, she wasn't sure how to respond. Who was this woman, and why was she being so rude? "I don't see what's so amateur about it," Ellie replied, trying to maintain her composure. "I put a lot of effort into my designs." The woman tilted her head, her lips curling into a smirk. "Effort? Sweetheart, this is nothing more than a hobby. Real designers don't work out of small apartments. They have studios, they hire people, they have actual backing. Do you even know how to run a business?" Ellie's hands trembled slightly, but she refused to let the woman's words affect her. "I'm working on it. It's not easy, but I'm doing everything I can to make it work." The woman's eyes narrowed, as if she were sizing Ellie up. "Well, good luck with that. You'll need it." She turned to leave, but then paused and glanced over her shoulder. "I'm Julia Lancaster, by the way. I'm sure you've heard of me. I'm one of the top designers in the country." Ellie blinked in surprise. Of course, she had heard of Julia Lancaster. Julia was a name that was often mentioned in fashion magazines, her collections gracing the most prestigious runways. But she never imagined that someone like her would walk into a place like this and belittle her so easily. Julia gave her a final, dismissive glance before leaving the studio, the door closing behind her with a soft click. Ellie stood there for a moment, stunned, as the hum of the sewing machine was the only sound that filled the room. She had been insulted, but more than that, she felt a deep sense of determination stirring within her. Julia Lancaster might have thought of her as nothing more than an amateur, but Ellie knew something that Julia didn't. She wasn't just some small-time designer trying to make it big. She was on the verge of something much bigger. But first, she needed to get better. She needed to prove to herself that she could rise above the doubts of others. Julia's harsh words, while painful, had ignited a spark in Ellie. She wasn't going to let some arrogant designer crush her dreams. She would show Julia and everyone else that she had what it took to succeed. That evening, Ellie stayed up late, sketching new designs, working on her technique, and learning everything she could about fashion marketing and branding. She was no longer going to just be a hobbyist. She was going to become a force in the fashion world, no matter how long it took. But she had no idea that Julia Lancaster's words were only the beginning of a much bigger story, one that would test her resilience, challenge her skills, and lead her to a surprising, life-changing revelation. And so, as the hours slipped by, Ellie sewed on, unaware that the path to her success was about to take an unexpected turn. Days turned into weeks, and Ellie's resolve grew stronger with each passing day. Every moment that she wasn't working at the coffee shop, she poured her energy into her designs. The harsh words Julia Lancaster had spoken that day in her studio seemed to echo in her mind, but instead of discouraging her, they pushed her further. Ellie was determined to prove that she was more than just an amateur. She spent hours researching the fashion industry, taking online courses about branding and business management, and reaching out to other designers for advice. But despite all her hard work, Ellie knew something was missing. She didn't have the resources Julia had. She didn't have a large team or the connections to make a real splash in the industry. She felt like a small fish in an ocean of sharks. Yet, she refused to let that stop her. She kept working, creating, and refining her vision, believing that if she just kept pushing, something would break. One evening, as she was finalizing a new collection of dresses, she received a notification on her phone. It was an email from a fashion contest she had entered months ago. She hadn't heard back from them in ages, and she had almost forgotten about it. Hesitant, she opened the email and scanned through. It quickly. We are pleased to inform you that you've been selected as a finalist in the 2025 New Designers Fashion Show. Your designs will be showcased at our event in New York City. More details will follow. Ellie blinked in disbelief. Her heart raced as the words sank in. She had made it. She was going to be showcased in a major fashion event. She felt a wave of excitement wash over her, but it was quickly followed by a flood of anxiety. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, but it also came with immense pressure. She knew this could be her big break, but she was scared. What if she wasn't good enough? What if her designs didn't stand out against the established names? She paced around her apartment, trying to calm her nerves. It was a huge honor to be chosen, but she couldn't shake the feeling of doubt that gnawed at her. What did she really know about running a fashion show in New York? She had no team, no budget for extravagant outfits, and no PR to back her up. Would anyone even care about her designs? But then she remembered Julia Lancaster's words. That cruel, dismissive tone. Julia had thought she was nothing, but now Ellie had been given a chance to prove that she was capable of so much more. This was her moment. Ellie immediately started planning for the show. She needed to create the best collection she could, and she needed to make it unforgettable. But how? The days leading up to the event were a whirlwind. Ellie spent long hours stitching, designing, and even sourcing materials that she couldn't afford. She was determined to make something extraordinary, even if it meant going beyond her comfort zone. The pressure mounted as the deadline drew nearer, and the reality of what she was about to do hit her harder than ever. Then, just as she was finalizing the last touches on her collection, she received another email, this one from none other than Julia Lancaster. Dear Ms. Ellis, I recently came across your name in connection with the New Designers Fashion Show, and I must say, I'm impressed by your resilience. I understand that you'll be showcasing your collection in New York soon. As I'm sure you know, fashion shows are not just about good designs, they are about connections, networking, and the right exposure. If you'd like, I would be happy to help you make the most of this opportunity. I have a team of publicists and stylists who could assist you in preparing for the show. I believe we could create something truly extraordinary together. Looking forward to hearing from you. Best regards, Julia Lancaster. Ellie stared at the email, her mind spinning. Was Julia offering to help her? The same woman who had belittled her work just weeks ago. The same woman who had dismissed her as an amateur. The sudden change in tone was almost too much to believe. For a moment, Ellie considered ignoring the email. After all, Julia had insulted her before. What if this was just a ploy to steal her designs or sabotage her efforts? But then, Ellie remembered her dreams. She remembered how badly she wanted to succeed, how hard she had worked, and how much she needed this opportunity. Was this the break she had been waiting for, or was it just a trap? After much thought, Ellie decided to take the risk. If Julia truly wanted to help, then why not accept her offer? She could use all the support she could get. Besides, it would be a chance to show the fashion world what she was truly capable of. Ellie replied to Julia's email, cautiously agreeing to meet. A few days later, they arranged to meet at a cafe in the city. The day of the meeting, Ellie arrived early, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never met someone like Julia Lancaster before, and she didn't know what to expect. When Julia walked in, Ellie couldn't help but notice how effortlessly elegant she looked, as if she belonged to another world entirely. Julia's presence was commanding, and Ellie immediately felt out of place in her worn-out jeans and simple blouse. Julia smiled at her and extended a hand. Ellie, it's so good to finally meet you in person. I've been following your progress, and I have to say, I'm impressed. Ellie shook her hand, trying to hide her nerves. Thank you. I really appreciate your offer to help. Julia smiled again, but this time it was more calculated, like a businesswoman making a deal. Of course. You have a lot of potential, Ellie. I've seen a lot of talent in my time, and you're definitely one to watch. But we both know that talent isn't enough. You need the right guidance, the right team behind you, and most importantly, the right image. That's where I come in. Ellie nodded, feeling a mix of hope and doubt. Could Julia really help her? Was she sincere, or was she just trying to take advantage of Ellie's talent? Julia continued, I'll have my team handle your PR, your presentation, and even some styling adjustments for the show. We'll make sure your collection is seen by the right people. Trust me, Ellie, this is your chance to shine. Ellie felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The offer seemed too good to pass up, but at the same time she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Was she really ready to trust someone who had once mocked her work? But one thing was clear. This opportunity could change everything for her. And so, with a mix of excitement and uncertainty, Ellie agreed to work with Julia Lancaster. She didn't know what the future held, but she was out to find out. And as the days passed and preparations for the show began, Ellie realized that her dream was no longer just a distant hope. It was becoming a reality. The weeks leading up to the new designer's fashion show were a blur of late nights, hurried decisions, and constant phone calls. Julia's team, her publicists, stylists, and assistants, worked tirelessly on Ellie's behalf. They polished her brand image, helped her refine the details of her collection, and even sourced high-end fabrics that Ellie never could have afforded on her own. There were times when Ellie felt like a spectator in her own success. Julia had a way of taking over everything, of making every decision for her, even when Ellie wanted to do things on her own. But she bit her tongue, knowing that this was a unique opportunity to launch her career. The night before the big show, Ellie stood in the middle of her small, crowded apartment, surrounded by her collection of dresses, shoes, and accessories. It felt unreal. She had started out as an amateur seamstress with no connections, no resources, just a passion for design. And now, here she was, about to showcase her work at one of the most important events in the fashion world. Julia had promised that the fashion show would be a launching pad, that it would propel Ellie's brand into the stratosphere. But Ellie's mind was a storm of thoughts. What if no one liked her designs? What if everything fell apart? As she paced the room, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Julia. Don't forget to meet us at the venue tomorrow at 9 a.m. I'll be there with my team to handle everything. Just focus on the show and leave the rest to us. Ellie stared at the message, her heart pounding. Julia was everywhere, making every move, controlling every detail. Ellie had always dreamed of being in control of her own brand, her own vision. But now, as the final moments approached, she wasn't sure if she even had the right to claim any ownership of her own work. Had she sold out? Was this the price of success? The next morning, Ellie arrived at the venue early, as instructed. The space was filled with the hustle and bustle of last-minute preparations. Models lined up for fittings, hair and makeup artists worked furiously, and assistants scurried around, taking care of every small detail. Julia stood near the stage, overseeing everything with her usual air of confidence. When she saw Ellie, she flashed her a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're looking good, Ellie. We've made some final tweaks to your collection. Trust me, it's going to be spectacular. Don't worry about a thing." Ellie nodded, though she could barely mask her unease. She had no idea what tweaks Julia had made, or how much of her original designs were still intact. It was as if her work had already been handed over, molded, and shaped into something that wasn't hers anymore. But she kept quiet, forcing herself to focus on the show ahead. As the fashion show began, Ellie felt a sense of detachment. She watched as her designs were paraded down the runway by models, their faces cold and expressionless. The bright lights of the venue illuminated her creations, but in her heart, Ellie felt like a stranger to her own work. Julia's publicists had arranged for cameras to capture every moment, and photographers snapped shots from all angles, but Ellie could barely bring herself to watch. All she could think about was whether her designs would stand out, or whether they had been altered beyond recognition. Halfway through the show, Ellie stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. A sudden, unexpected noise pierced through the excitement of the runway show. A voice boomed from the back of the room, and it took Ellie a moment to realize who it was. "Excuse me, but I need to speak with the designer of this collection," said a deep voice, cutting through the clamor of the event. A moment later, the voice came again. "Ellie Ellis?" Ellie's heart stopped. She turned to see a tall man in a sharp suit approaching her. He had a commanding presence, and there was something unmistakably familiar about him, but she couldn't quite place it. He smiled when he saw her. "I'm George Ackerman, the CEO of Ackerman Fashions. We've been watching your work closely." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. Ackerman Fashions. The name was synonymous with high-end luxury. This was the kind of exposure she had only dreamed about. George Ackerman was no ordinary businessman. He was a giant in the fashion industry, one of the most powerful people in the world of design. He extended a hand. "I've heard a lot about you, Ellie. I must say, I'm impressed with what I've seen here today. These designs, they're remarkable." Ellie's mind raced. Thank you, but I'm still just starting out." George chuckled. "Well, starting out or not, you've definitely got the potential to go far. But I need to know something. This collection, it's different from the designs you showed in your submission. I assume you've had some help." Ellie swallowed hard. The last few weeks had been a blur of decisions made by Julia and her team. She wasn't sure what was truly hers anymore. "Yes, I've had some guidance from Julia Lancaster and her team." George raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Julia Lancaster, huh? I see." He paused for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "Well, if you're interested, we'd love to offer you a deal. We can bring you into Ackerman Fashions, help you take your brand to the next level. But you'll need to make a decision. You'll need to choose if you want to be a part of a larger machine, or if you want to stand alone and build your own legacy. I know it's a tough decision, but it's yours to make, eh?" Ellie stood there, stunned. The offer was everything she had ever wanted, but it came with a price. She knew that accepting it would mean giving up her independence, her vision. The designs that had started in her small apartment would become just another collection under a corporate umbrella. Was she ready to give that up? Before she could answer, a voice interrupted the moment. It was Julia. "George, I'm so glad you could make it." "I hope you're enjoying the show," Julia said, her tone smooth and calculating. George nodded. "Yes, I was just speaking with Ellie here. We're discussing some potential opportunities for the future." Julia's eyes flickered with surprise, and then, just as quickly, her smile returned. I see. Well, Ellie has a lot of potential. I'm glad you see that too. But Ellie was no longer paying attention to Julia's words. She was lost in thought. What did she really want? She had always dreamed of making it on her own terms. But now, faced with this incredible opportunity, she realized something she hadn't before. She had already made it. She didn't need anyone else to validate her work. Ellie took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and turned to George. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Ackerman, but I'm going to have to decline. I've worked too hard to get where I am to give it up now. George smiled, clearly impressed by her response. I respect that, Ellie. You're a rare one, but remember, the door is always open. As George walked away, Julia stepped forward, a hint of disbelief on her face. You turned down Ackerman Fashions? Are you crazy? That's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Ellie looked Julia in the eye, her voice firm. No, what's crazy is believing that I need someone else to make me successful. I've already made it. This is my vision, my brand, and I'm going to take it as far as I can, on my own. For the first time in a long while, Ellie felt free. The journey wasn't going to be easy, but she was ready to face whatever came next. She didn't need anyone's approval, and she didn't need to conform to anyone's expectations. She was Ellie Ellis, the designer who had started from scratch and built something beautiful, and she was just getting started. As the fashion show came to a close, Ellie stood backstage, watching the crowd applaud her collection. The applause was for her, just her, and in that moment, she knew she had made the right choice. The future was hers, and it was more brilliant than she had ever imagined.